She is an associate editor for Slam Magazine and a co-host of the Hoopish Show. We welcome Deyscha Smith onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Deyscha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm hyped.
Thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. Our show is similar to your show. We tackle kind of the X's and O's a little bit with the NBA, but we like to cover basketball culture as a whole. I just think it's extremely important, not just to cover what LeBron James is just what points he's going to score on any day. I think basketball is it's much more of just a culture in terms of the history and what's taking place now. And in saying that, we covered the W in women's basketball as well, and a lot of developments have been happening. And notice your article on JuJu Watkins, the USC freshman, and I just think that really women's college basketball in particular is really blowing up right now, and I think we're going to see a fusion of really the college game and the pro game really coming together within the next just couple of months. So I want to focus on JuJu Watkins and your article. And I know Caitlin Clark's getting a lot of attention, which we'll get to in a second. But with JuJu Watkins, for basketball fans that don't know who she is, can you kind of give a synopsis in terms of why she's blown up, why she's been referenced by Gilbert Arenas in terms of like her game, and why do you think she's poised for some great things in the future?
Yeah, Juju's a rock star. I feel like that's the best, the best way to describe her. She's electric on the court. Her game is so fluid. And she's been a rock star since high school. She's had everyone from rappers to LeBron, obviously pulling up, sitting courtside at her games. And, now she's at USC and she's really carrying the torch of that USC legend and legacy, and also kind of, really kind of helping carry women's basketball into this new momentum. But yeah, you watch JuJu play and you're like, she is a star. And it's crazy because she's just a freshman, which is insane.
So, where's her ceiling, do you think? And kind of based on what's happening with not only Caitlin Clark, but Sabrina Ionescu and Paige Buckers and other kind of peers that's in this era with her, does she stay all 4 years in college? Do you have a situation where there's a lot of pressure if we see Caitlin Clark really become the face of the WNBA and Angel Reese as well? Like, where does she go in terms of kind of the college game? Where do you think her future lies?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I really don't think that there's a ceiling. I think that the sky is the limit for Juju, and we look at Hannah and Caitlin and all of these stars, Angel Reese, in the game, and I think you're absolutely right. Like the transition right from college to the pros is a transition, and the WNBA really is its own league and its own game and has its own stars. But I think kind of this era that we're in with women's college hoops, it's going to be really, really exciting. I don't always like to predict, like, is a player gonna, stay for X amount of time or do this, because I really just love to enjoy the game, and the game brings me so much joy, and they already have a lot of pressure. But I think at the same time, like, whatever Juju decides, and even we see Caitlin, she just declared, the sky really is the limit for them. I think it'll be interesting to see a lot of these younger players and new faces, like, Caitlin, if she's selected number one and goes to the Fever, that'll be really interesting. Seeing her play alongside like Analia Boston would be super, super compelling. But yeah, I think once these college stars go to the W, they really kind of have to form their own identity and really kind of get used to that system. So we'll see. We'll see.
With this transition from college to the pros, is there any reason to be maybe just a little more concerned, or maybe like pumping the brakes a little bit on first year expectations, because we know that there aren't many roster spots available
Yeah.
in the WNBA in general, so it's a very deep league for the
Yep.
players available. I mean, are are there any concerns, that expectations are like maybe we're filling them up with gas too much on their way in?
Yeah, I mean, we as the media, right? We tend to control a lot of narratives, and we are the ones that kind of help create the hype. Obviously, the players do it on the court, but we're the ones that really hype it up, which is amazing for women's basketball. But I completely agree. Like, I think that's a reality for a lot of W fans is, they love these players in college, and then, they might not necessarily realize, like, yeah, there are limited roster spots, training camp, all of that type of stuff. And, I think that with the W expanding, I really hope that that gets better. I mean, there's so many players that were, on teams last season that, didn't end up making the roster. So many players get drafted and don't even make the roster. So, yeah, I think that that's like a really harsh reality, but I hope expansion helps that.
I heard an interesting comparison just kind of with the timeline of where the WNBA is. I believe it was on Bill Simmons' show with Chuck Klosterman actually made the comparison that, women's basketball, where it is right now, granted, there's a lot of modern day differences just with NIL and things like that, but it seems
Totally.
to be on a similar trajectory to where men's basketball was kind of in the 80s in terms of, like, we had the Big East was very popular, maybe arguably the most popular basketball that was out there, even over the NBA at that point, until we get later into the 80s. Do you see that as an apt comparison for where the WNBA is right now in terms of the strength of college versus pros? I mean, we've seen the ratings numbers increase in the WNBA, no doubt, and they've been monstrous in college for several of the games, even over the course of the regular season. I guess, long question here, and sorry for that, but where do you see the WNBA and women's college sports right now on their timeline?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, women's college basketball has always been exciting and amazing. You could go back to like, Skylar when, she was playing and Enrique, right? Like there's been all of these legends. I think the difference though is that there's social media. And I think
Hmm.
that's really like the difference, right? Is like, there are so many eyes on women's college basketball just because streaming and information is a lot more accessible. And whereas in the 80s and 90s and I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years ago, right? Like even streaming, watching games was difficult for women's basketball. Whereas now you could just go on Twitter and you can see highlights all the time. I feel like that's kind of where, and I see it with the WNBA as well with social media, where there's so many WNBA creators that are almost like creating this new media of like pushing information, covering games, helping make sure that like stats and information are a lot more accessible. And I think that's really kind of where women's basketball has really like reached a new momentum culturally and socially because we just are able to access the highlights and, all of the team's social media posts way more than before.
Do you think with women's college basketball and the WNBA, like you
Mhm.
said, they've been able to capitalize on social media more than the male counterparts? Because in terms of popularity at March Madness, who's really talking about the males game?
I
I've
know.
seen a lot of top media outlets. Shannon Sharp was like, I can't name you a a male college basketball player. We can't either unless we're talking about the Lobos. We went
Mm,
to the University of Mexico. So other than that, because we were alumni, we couldn't name you a male college basketball player. So, and I think this has been a trend overall with just the buzz of a lot of these women's players in high school on social media.
yeah.
What do you think is kind of the difference there compared to kind of their male counterparts?
Yeah, I actually saw this tweet. It's so funny that you bring that up because I saw this tweet where like someone was like, "Oh, like why aren't we talking about men's basketball?" Like it was almost like I don't know, some men's basketball fans are like getting salty. They're like, "Oh, no one's talking about it." And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, especially considering I've always been someone in my career that's covered both men's and women's basketball. Going to the men's Final Four and covering the WNBA and all of that type of stuff. So I've always kind of, I guess, paid attention to both. I would definitely say that this really is like the first time where I'm like, oh yeah, people are really tuned into women's college basketball and not so much the guys. But I think at the same time, like, it just kind of, I guess, depends on your viewership and what you're into. I know I still watch men's college basketball, and at Slam, it's been really cool because we have a lot of players that play in the Slam Summer Classic in high school, and now they're in college. We had like Cooper Flagg on the cover, and he'll be in college soon. So, I'm definitely tuned into both, but I think at the same time, like, you have Caitlin, you have Juju, you have Hannah, you have Angel Reese. Like, these players are so exciting that I also just love seeing, like, so many new fans are really starting to watch the game. And I really hope that this is like an opportunity for them to learn new players and other faces, because Caitlin's amazing, right? But there's so many women in college basketball, except she is shooting from the logo, so it's pretty freaking cool. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about JuJu Watkins and
Yeah.
again your article you wrote. Can you kind of take us into how she is as a freshman in terms of the environment of just her classmates, like going to class, like the pressure that she faces? Like she's probably a rock star on campus already, and as well, Caitlin Clark. Like, what is the pressure of just being a freshman in college, but yet dealing with all these expectations of people, knowing who you are and that anonymity is gone. You can't just be a freshman in college. You're kind of like this chosen one of
Yeah.
this historic basketball history of USC.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because, like, I feel like if I was able, if I, I'm 27, so I didn't witness like LeBron when he was in high school. I wish if I had like a magic wish, I would have loved to see that era in person. But that would have been an interesting question to ask, like a LeBron, right? Like the entire world knew who he was, all of that type of stuff. With Juju, it was super, super interesting because the minute I got on campus, I like to go to like campus bookstores and things like that. And so I went into the school store and I saw right next to Bronny's jersey was Juju's. And I was like, okay, that is amazing. That's super cool. Then I walk outside of the campus bookstore and I'm like, oh, school paper. Like, let's see what their sports section is talking about. And the minute I open the sports section, the only photo, and it's huge, it fills up almost the whole page, was of Juju. And that was before we even did the cover shoot. And so I was like, okay, like Juju really is a star. You have her jersey. She's, front page of the sports section. And then we get to the cover shoot and we shot inside the practice facility. And then we also went outside. And the lead of the story, there was a really, really cool moment where while we were photographing her, someone who was driving in a car nearby screams like, I love you, Juju. And, we didn't know who it was. She didn't know if it was a random person or a friend or a teammate. But that I feel like was really what really kind of opened my eyes, where I was like, okay, like everyone knows who she is and she is a rock star on the same campus that LeBron James's son is also here, right? Like there's so many celebrities and stars too that go to USC. And that's when I was really like, wow, like this is a really, really cool moment. But I think what was really interesting is that Juju is, as much as she is a rock star and, she is a celebrity in her own right, she's also just like a freshman in college. You know what I mean? She watches movies just like everyone else. She loves listening to R&B music. Like I think that's what's really interesting is that you take all of the hype and the attention that surrounds a player, and then you actually spend time with them and you realize, these young players really are just like exceptional athletes and they're people with an exceptional talent. And that's what I think makes like my job really cool to write about them. And I, loved writing that cover story because I was like, she really, between her and Caitlin and, Hannah, Angel, we could name so many others. There are these stars, but they're also just kids in college that have class and have tests and, maybe don't eat in the dining hall like everybody else. I don't know. But at the same time, right, like, they're on TikTok and they're just kind of like college kids. And I'm 27, so I'm actually not that much older than a lot of them as well, which is crazy.
So I want to shift to the effect of NIL on these athletes and why there's controversy. And recently, what happened with Caitlin Clark declaring that she's going to be in the WNBA draft, there seems to be some kind of controversy about her like taking a pay cut, which I find ridiculous. Like I don't know why this is even a conversation, and I think it's pretty sexist to be honest. Like I was baffled. And we were talking about really respected journal, or were respected journalists we're making this into a big story. Like, I just want to ask, in your opinion, where do you see kind of the relationship between NIL and these athletes overall? Just in terms of, instead of typically the relationship of these athletes is that, unfortunately they're not paid in college and they have to wait till they're pros. Now they're seeing real money immediately, right when they get into college, even before that. Do you think that has a positive or a negative effect, on these athletes on or off the court, you think?
Yeah, I loved, especially like what you said in the beginning, like this whole controversy and this discourse, especially on Twitter, it's just ridiculous. Like
Yeah.
I loved when Haley Jones like spoke up about it and was like, look, like you need to actually get educated on the W. Like, no, I did not take a pay cut by going to the W. Like my NIL and my deals didn't stop. I think NIL is, I mean, it's been fascinating. And, as all of us, right, that have watched college basketball for so long, it's just really changed. I feel like the landscape. You see Caitlin, and she has all of these deals. I think she just signed a new one earlier today or yesterday. She's in Nike commercials. Like, I think that NIL is fantastic for the college athletes. It really gives them, I feel like, this opportunity to build their own brand and, also support themselves, support their families, and, NIL deals. Like Caitlin signed a multi-year deal recently, right? Like that's not going to end when she goes to the W. So I feel like it's, people just aren't educated on, honestly, the W and kind of the whole system with it. And yeah, I don't know. This controversy is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I do feel like a lot of people, I mean, myself included early on, I didn't know that the NILs lasted beyond, a college career.
Hmm.
Have you seen like a particular length that on average these deals are being signed for? I mean, is it typically like, like a 4-year span, like a standard college education, or even things beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what I've seen is like, especially when it comes to like the sneaker deals or signing with like sneaker companies and
Mm.
things like that. There's so many W players that are signed with Nike, Adidas, things like that. And some of those deals, especially for the recently drafted like Aaliyah and things like that, that did start like when they were in college. And now you see it with, JuJu has NIL deals, I believe, and Caitlin. So yeah, I don't know, the exact, I guess, like span of the deals, but I just mainly hear like multi-year being used a lot. So it definitely goes to show that, there's a lot of like crossover or carryover from college to the W, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's most baffling when you hear the narrative around Caitlin Clark specifically, because there is so much buzz around her in particular. I mean, a lot of people, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but a lot of people are thinking she's going to change, like be this one player. And granted, there are multiple talented players we know and great personalities, but this one player, I think people are viewing her as that is going to completely transform the league and maybe even shift, what I was alluding to earlier about kind of this balance of power, this tug of war between women's college basketball and the women's professional game, to where things may flip as they did in the NBA eventually, with the rise of Magic and Bird and Michael Jordan carrying on kind of the torch, so to speak, after that. Do you see a shift of power potentially coming? I mean, is there even that potential with the way things are structured right now?
I think that we just love a good story. Like, I
For
think
sure.
Magic and Bird is right. Like that was a good story. That's like I wasn't even like I didn't even think I was alive when that was going on, and I know the story, right? Like, and I feel like yeah, the shifting of power and I feel like also just like influence and legacy adds to the story as well. Like it's so tough because the W is so powerful, right? Like you have like super teams like the Aces, right? Like they've built dynasties. Asia has a statue, you know what I mean? Like you look at, like the Aces, the Liberty Stewie, Yukon, right? Like these are legends. Diana, Sue, Maya. But I think at the same time, you know, I don't know. I'm the type of person where I'm just like, a good story is a good story, and we'll see what Caitlin does. And I think it's interesting to think in terms of like, okay, is she gonna like really, change women's basketball, even though women's basketball has been electric and incredible for decades. And there's a whole history of women's basketball, things like that. Like in Iowa, right? Like, women would young high school girls would play 6-on-6 before they were allowed to play 5-on-5, things like that. And so, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I think that it's so easy to put so much pressure into like what will the future look like, but it's also just like the only person that's really going to determine that is Caitlin when she's there. You know what I mean? Like we we could have said the same thing about Asia when she was at South Carolina, and now look at her, right? Like she wrote that script. But yeah, for us, it is interesting to like talk about and prophesize. So
Yeah, well, and to one of your original points there, do you think that narrative and the ability to build narrative is a distinct advantage for the women's game now? In that,
mm,
we talked about earlier, can't really name many men's college players or teams that were all that interested necessarily, unless maybe you're, that school's alma mater, all those types of things that are kind of inherent. But with the women's game and women's basketball players still being in school for multiple years,
yeah.
is that a distinct advantage for drawing up better narratives potentially than the men's game?
That is such an interesting question. Um,
So I feel
huh.
like there's an advantage there.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
I mean it's so interesting because on the guys' side, right? Like one and done. Like you look at like,
Yeah.
a Kentucky and Duke, right? Like, these schools that have like really created this. I mean, you look at the NBA now, right? Like the NBA is a direct result of one and done, right? Like then the NBA draft is almost always one and done. But so that's so interesting. I feel like when it comes to the women's game, we sometimes like go back and forth about this in the office because we're kind of like, okay, what would it look like if there really was one and done? But it's interesting because I think college players staying all 4 years, I can see both sides of it, right? Like, I do think that we're going to start to really see these players where I think the conversation of one and done is going to really start to come up, especially like talent pool and, all of that type of stuff. I think at the same time, though, when it comes to like brand building and storytelling, and now you have NIL, which is, attached to the schools and all of that type of stuff, like, yeah, it'll be really, really interesting to see. I feel like that conversation probably start to come up because you could argue for like so many players in the W, like what if they could have gone one and done? You know what I mean? Like what would have
Yeah.
happened? Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe the conversation will come up soon.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting too because the NIL may serve as sort of this function to preserve things the way they are. Like there's not, in the men's game, there's kind of, you can go after high school for a while there. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
that's what LeBron did, Dwight Howard, Kobe, Kevin Garnett,
Mhm.
all these players that, they were some of the ones that were able to rise above some of the struggles that some other guys who tried to come out of high school faced. But there may
Mhm.
not have even been the need for that mechanism or that rush had there been, of course, NIL at the time. So it's almost like
Yeah.
it's sort of a way to preserve the women's college game maybe where it is right now. I mean, maybe not preserve's not the right way to put it, but there's not this urgent mechanism to make money sooner
Mhm.
necessarily for these players.
Yeah, and I was reading even that, like, I believe it was Caitlin, that got, I think when she, even before she was a freshman in high school, her coach or something received a letter from some college coaches saying that at 14 she could like start on their team right then and there. And so it's so interesting because it's like, yeah, like what if Caitlin could have, you know what I mean? Like gone straight to the pros out of college, or any of these players, Caitlin, Juju, like this exact story that we have now of this new era of women's basketball and all of this momentum that could have not been at the level that it is now if they would have gone straight to the pros. So yeah, it's super, super interesting for sure.
So I want to let you go with this question. I want to kind of get your preview of the W. It's a little bit early, but a lot of main storylines happening. And I just want to kind of get kind of your perspective on league expansion. Their TV deal is going to be up fairly soon. Of course, we talked about, the impending arrival of Caitlin Clark. The Aces going for the three-peat. What are you looking forward to in the W this year, and kind of the future of the league? I know there's been kind of different controversies in terms of roster spots. Like, what are you looking for in terms of this year specifically for growth and storylines that fans should be watching out for?
I'm so excited. First of all, Skylar, she's back. I feel like I've been waiting on the edge of my seat for this moment. Like, I am so hyped. I feel like that team is going to be such a powerful squad. I've written the cover story on the Aces and the Liberty as well. So I'm really, really hyped to see, like if these teams will be able to run it back. We all, obviously with Caitlin declaring, if when I don't know, she, gets number one pick and goes to Indiana. That'll be super, super interesting. Yeah, I feel like we're really, it's interesting, I guess, because this like narrative of the super team era, like I remember last season, it was, oh, the Aces, oh, the Liberty. And, I remember when I sat down with the Aces, they were like, we've always been this super team squad. We're the same squad that ran it back. You know what I mean? But I think it'll be interesting because, and there's also the expansion too. That'll be super, super cool. Once that really like gets going and gets off the ground. And then I also think that this incoming draft class will also be really, really cool. And then there's just more excitement to come, right? Between like, I know Paige is gonna go, return, but once Paige, starts to talk about coming to the W, and we have Juju and Hannah in the future. Yeah, I feel like the WNBA, the excitement, this is really just the beginning. And this season will really kind of, I feel like, bring all of the fandom and the excitement and the hype, and also the game. Like the women's game is growing, and it is so exciting and so fun to watch. And you see in the NBA, right? Like over time, you had this surgence of shooting from Steph Curry and 3-point shooting. How's that going to look when you bring what many people call the female Steph Curry into the W, right? Like, that type of stuff. But there's obviously Sabrina, who can shoot the lights out and hold her own against Steph. And so, yeah, I feel like we're just going to really see like just this elevation of play, competition, and now, there's some new squads coming in the mix as well. So I'm super, super hyped. I'm like counting down the days. And I love March Madness. Like March Madness is one of my favorite times of the year. But yeah, as a women's basketball fan and someone that covers it, I feel so spoiled that we're going to get to go for March and then draft and then soon it'll be the W season. So I'm hyped.
We are too. Yeah, it's going to be awesome. We're really looking forward to it. Deyscha, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Please let our audience know where they can find you on social media and then all the projects you're working on as well.
Yeah, you can find me at Deyscha Smith. It's just my name. So Deyscha Smith. Yeah, Instagram, TikTok. I'm always tweeting. And then, yeah, upcoming projects you will have to see. Yeah, we got some really cool stuff in the works. So you guys will just have to tune in.
Stay tuned.
Awesome.
Awesome.
We'll be watching. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.